Okay, good morning. Today we'll finish gender inequality and then move on to the last topic before the midterm exam, and that's Korean education. So I'm sure for those of you interested in issues related to Korea, the education frenzy is probably one of the most interesting phenomena about Korea, right? Anyway, so we'll finish this up, and just to get you sort of refreshed, or to remind you as to what we covered for the last two classes. So I had a brief introduction on this topic, followed by discussion on difference between sex and gender, and I referred to three indexes that are widely referred to throughout the world. And I also discussed, in what ways are Korean women discriminated. And I discussed some sort of facts related to gender pay gap, underrepresentation of women in politics, and so on. And then, oops, there's a typo there. And then I discussed, well, the factors which explain the existence or persistence of extensive gender inequality in Korea. And I'll finish this up, okay? So as you remember, may remember, or should remember, a very useful sort of a concept in trying to understand this phenomenon of sexism or gender inequality is what is called intersectionality. As you can see in this particular graph, sort of a given phenomenon. Let's say in this case, gender inequality, it's not just caused by one thing, okay? It is all connected, okay? So one's age, one's sexuality, one's income, gender, language, all sort of overlap to produce a sense of empowerment or a sense of oppression or discrimination. So what are the cultural and social factors which account for the persistence of extensive gender inequality in Korea? That was the question we started talking about. And these were the factors I sort of shared with you. And so I finished up to military culture, right? So I'll finish up the rest today. And with the time we have left, I'll start talking about Korean education, okay? So first factor of Confucianism, I spoke at length as to what principles or what teachings of Confucianism amount to sort of a sexist teaching or sort of a male-dominant views, right? And then I also spoke at length about how military culture of Korea, which is quite common, I would say. I don't think, can you think of any country that could be considered pacifist? Meaning they're so into peace, they don't have an army. So I think every society has sort of an aspect of something military, okay? It's sort of a necessary evil, okay? To protect yourself, to protect the borders, it's something you sort of need. Yes? Which country? Liechtenstein. Okay, thank you. So there is one country that does not have an army. Any? Which country? Costa Rica. if you could consider Costa Rica as a separate country, but it should be considered a separate country, right? Anyway, there are two countries now, because it's a U.S. territory, right? Oh, okay. Got it. So there are two countries, Costa Rica and Liechtenstein. Any other countries? All right, so I have to take back. So, yes. Oh, Japan has definitely a major big army. It doesn't have the right to sort of take any military actions. That was the agreement made with the USA, right? At the conclusion of World War II. But it does have a strong army. Okay? Well, to rephrase this particular point, most societies or most countries are militaristic in the sense that it's considered a necessary evil, something that you need to maintain in order to at least protect the country. Okay. Anyway, but so in the case of Korea, it's more pronounced. It's more important because of the political reality, right? We have this belligerent North Korea, which is constantly creating these issues, right? Always, testing, conducting all these missile tests, and then, is believed to have nuclear arms. At least it's in the development stage. So that's why we're one of a dozen or so countries which has a conscription, right? Now we turn to the third factor. So this is something new, right? So it's not what I covered last week. Third, Korean men. Okay, when you talk about gender inequality of Korea, it's to a degree, it's because Korean men are not willing to, remember when we talked about the family and the reason for rising divorce rate has to do with the fact that Korean men have not changed enough to accept changing demands of women, and the same idea is applied here. Okay, so steeped in 500-year-old attitudes of patriarchy, men do not wish to abandon beliefs and practices that are advantageous to them. Here, the role of the military service in perpetuating sexist attitudes is noteworthy. Okay? So, if you recall my discussion on the military culture, I'm sure you would understand what I'm saying. Next is, so the next three, I put a question mark at the end because these are ideas. Okay, so it's up to you to decide whether it makes sense or not in explaining the persistence of extensive gender inequality in Korea. Again, among the economically advanced nations, Korea, along with Japan to a certain extent, are the only two countries, or let's just stick with Korea, probably among the economically developed countries, Korea is the only country with some of the worst indicators, whether it's representation in politics or representation of women in senior positions, in managerial positions, in hiring, whatever the case may be. Korea is said to have sort of worst indicators, right? So this one goes like this. In general, Western-style feminism has not taken root in Asia, or let's say Korea, because there are, local customs that people have to deal with, or feminists. And Western feminism is not always relevant to local people. Okay? And that's also true in Korea. But the controversial ones are these. These behaviors, which occur at the level of everyday life, are set to reinforce sexist reinforce the persistence of gender inequality. Again, if you tell me if you agree with this, the argument, or not. Here we go. When new shops open up, I don't know if you have seen enough of these, but oftentimes you see dancing girls in short skirts, right, dancing. But I've never seen a dancing man, okay? Curfews that are different. I mean, this is sort of universal, I would say, or at least true in many countries. What about in the USA? Is it when couples have both boy and girl, would they have the same standard, or would they have different standard? Well, at least in Korea, it's still true that, you know, parents definitely have different standards, you know, for sons and daughters. Compliance with feminine stereotypes of behavior in schools, workplace, and home. Like putting on a makeup is an etiquette. That's sort of a popular saying. And also women calling older men oppa. See, these are what feminists point out. Because if you are in a relationship with a man, even if the man is 1 or 2 years older, you're in an equal relationship. But by calling that person oppa, you put yourself in a lower position, at least subliminally. So, you know, what do you do about this, according to feminists? What about wives calling their husbands appa? It is supposed to be 철수 아빠, you know, so it's literally father of a offspring's name, right? So if it's Susan, it's like, hey, Susan father. But because they want to speed up things, they just delete the name and call them just appa. Can you imagine a 35-year-old woman calling her husband appa? Does that make sense to you? If you want to make Korea more gender equal, is that something that you should practice without knowing? That's the argument of feminists. Yes. But if you're talking about positions of power, if you're in a position of power, and if we agree that it's men who are in more powerful position, for them to sort of call older women nuna, it doesn't carry as much symbolic significance as a disadvantaged person having to call someone with a title. Okay? So again, and you could probably think of more examples. And what about this? It's a very controversial one. Or at least, I don't know about the young people, but older people, let's say from the 30s on, from what I know, there's still this expectation, men pay more at least, okay? And what feminists point out is this. You know, in the West, is it safe to say that it's typically half and half, Dutch? Guess who started it? Was it men who said, hey, I'm on a date with you, but I'm just going to pay my half, and you pay the other half? Was it men who started that, or women who started that? It was women. Okay? So the point about this is that if this is still true, then idea about this is under this subheading, right? Behaviors which reinforce the persistence of gender inequality at the level of everyday life. And feminists are arguing that women themselves should be more reflective of, the impact of their own behavior on the persistence of gender inequality. And one of them would be that, yes, if, men may be wealthier, the point is, by paying half, that is establishing equality. Okay? That's the idea. Okay? Before I move on, any thoughts? Or any other behavior at the level of everyday life that should be mentioned along with these? Yes? Oh. Okay. Women being passive in dating matters. Well, it's something to think about, right? Why is it that I think in the West too, right? It still has some way to go, right? Where women being more assertive when it comes to dating, right? But your observation is that for Korean women, it's almost non-existent. Okay. Well, I don't know if I could make any comment on that, but that's an observation. I think valid. Anyone else with something to add to the list of everyday behavior on the part of women, which may contribute to the persistence of gender inequality in Korea? All right. Many researches show that mothers also play a powerful role in enforcing sexist Confucian norms at the individual level. At the political level, women's organizations have traditionally put democratization and democracy ahead of gender equality. Also, women's organizations have fractured along class lines as well as along the political orientation, that is progressive versus conservative. What this slide is pointing out is this, especially the latter two, is that feminism has not really taken roots like it did, let's say, in the West. Partly because, can you believe that certain women's groups in Korea are conservative? I don't know if that is also true in the West, but we do have conservative women's groups, okay? And there are progressive. And, conservative women's groups, they're not really fighting for, greater women's rights. It's more of a women's group, just, group that just has women as members. But we do have that kind of difference that exists. All right, the next one is something very controversial, as you can see, female prostitution. Okay? So I want you to think about this issue. Can this be related to gender inequality? Okay? Or can the existence of extensive gender inequality lead to more prostitution? Okay? Well, something to that effect. Okay? Well, Korean society as a whole, and as you may know, right now, there are about more than a dozen countries which have legalized prostitution. And that's another thing to think about, right? What are your thoughts on the legalization of prostitution? And what about the idea, like the issue of abortion? constitutional court in Korea passed a ruling, and since 2021, women have the right to get abortion in Korea. But until then, it was illegal. The same idea. Who has the ultimate right to his or her own body, right? So in the case of prostitution, those who are in favor of legalization argue that ultimately it's the women and men themselves who engage in prostitution. They have the ultimate say in what they do with their own bodies, right? So again, these are the issues that you could look into as a way of exploration. And at the center of this tradition, where again, prostitution is culturally accepted in Korea, okay? And the whole sort of tradition is centered around this existence of kiseng. Have you heard of this term before? It's geisha in Japan. Now, they are known to play instruments. They are really good dancers, and they could sing. And some also became skilled in writing poetry. Not because they are inclined in that direction, and this is my personal evaluation. I think they did it to amuse men, to attract men, okay? Because that made them stand out, right? We're talking about kiseng came from slave families, okay? And really interesting thing is, I don't know how many other countries have this tradition, but Korean government in the Joseon dynasty owned many slaves. And from female slaves, they chose some to be sex slaves. Ultimately, that's what it is. Okay? So, they first appeared in Goryeo dynasty, but throughout the country, we had local government offices, right? And these offices had these kiseng. So these kiseng belonged to these offices. And they were mobilized whenever there was a party, okay? Or a senior government official from the central government paid a visit, okay? And even some prominent scholars openly had a relationship with kiseng. And if you were to name the most important philosopher in the history of Korea, is Taege. He's on the 1001 bill note. This is how accepted so-called prostitution was. So I'm using a very broad term, prostitution, to this, but that's how it used to be. Now, here is romanticization of kiseng as it was done in Japan. You have some, what are your thoughts on geisha? What is your stereotypical, what is your image of geisha? From what you saw in movies and so on. And I really want you to rethink geisha and kiseng. Because again, they are said to be about the same, all right? Now, and again, this romanticization of kiseng and geisha has happened, and the arguments go like this. It's a very famous saying, right? History is written by the victors. And this is a quote from the author of the Da Vinci Code. History is always written by the winners, when two cultures clash, the loser is obliterated and the winner writes the history books. Books which glorify their own cause and disparage the conquered foe. As Napoleon once said, what is history but a fable agreed upon? Now, in the history of the world, who wrote the history? Was it women or men? It was largely men. And especially Korea, it was written exclusively by men. And when these writers had to write about Kiseng, could they have written it as it really happened? Or, in order to justify men patronizing these women, they portray these women in a nicest way possible. But ultimately, what happened to these women? Yes, they danced, they played instruments because there was no karaoke machine. Okay? It was not because these women were like skilled. They were trained. Trained for what? To entertain men. That's what it was, to entertain men while they were drinking. And again, they were slaves. Okay? And yes, they were skilled musicians, they were skilled in dancing, but ultimately all of that was to entertain men. And there was no way of getting out, okay, of that bondage. Okay? They could never become a free woman. Okay? The only thing they could look forward to, best outcome, was that a man who was rich enough to pay the state to free her, and then the best hope that she had was to become a concubine. That's it. And the children of born to concubine and a nobleman, their status was the same slave class. Okay? So all these ideas, possessing the body of the lower class but the mind of an aristocrat, these are all, again, written by men, again, to justify what they did. And yes, there was a very small number, I would say less than 1% of Kiseng who did not really engage in prostitution. Okay, less than 1%. They only dealt with the king or the most powerful men. And these very, 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 very small number of Kiseng were the exception. But the rest, okay? Now, if you think women today, in Korea are disadvantaged, can you imagine how things were back in the Joseon Dynasty? Do you think these Kiseng could say no to advancing men? I would say no. And even this very small minority of women, like the most, the talented Kiseng, are said to have abstained from engaging in prostitution, but that's just a theory. But I would say, I don't think there was any Kiseng who could be free from prostitution. Okay? Given, again, remember what I told you about the Confucian culture during the Joseon Dynasty, right? It was totally oppressive toward women. Women had no rights, and these were slaves. And how could they say no to men who wanted them? All right? So again, history written by men tend to, again, romanticize about, what happened. Okay? So type Kiseng, and you'll get a nice entry in the Wikipedia. Okay? I think they spelled it Kiseng with K, right? These are pictures from like the turn of the 20th century. Okay? when this picture was taken, the royal court had hundreds of these women. Okay? A picture of Kiseng, again around 1900. Okay, so in addition to Kiseng, many of whom catered only to government officials and noblemen, there were other types of prostitutes, including what is called yunya. Okay? So given this cultural history, again, when I'm giving you all these ideas, I'm not making a moral judgment as to whether prostitution is good or bad. Because again, there are countries like Germany, and some, like a state in the US, some provinces in Australia have legalized prostitution. So I'm not making a moral judgment on these practices. I'm just sharing with you what happened in Korea culturally. Okay, please. So again, since the founding of the republic in 1948, prostitution has been illegal, but police enforcement has been lax. Okay? Korea reportedly has the world's 6th largest market for prostitution after China, Spain, Japan, Germany, and the USA. Okay? The scale of Korean prostitution industry is shocking. There were 30,000 adult entertainment establishments back in 2010. I think the number is down. Okay, and there are all these places where prostitution could take place. All right, so prostitution debate in and outside of Korea goes like this. Some women's groups have campaigned against the laws illegalizing prostitution, arguing that individuals have the right to do what they want with their own bodies. But other feminist scholars, on the other hand, equate prostitution with rape. For example, Farley claims that, quote, the sexual exploitation of children and women in prostitution is often indistinguishable from incest, intimate partner violence, and rape, unquote. Well, I'll come back to this, your thoughts later. So to continue, what do you think about feminist argument against prostitution that it, like the harmful effect of pornography, leads to sexual objectification of women? That is, treating women solely as sex objects or as objects of sexual desire. And I think I mentioned this earlier. Do you think prostitution is related to gender inequality? If so, why? And in what ways may gender inequality fuel prostitution and vice versa? So if you are taking any course where you have to write a term paper, I think this is an excellent topic. Okay? And good chance to explore why prostitution or legalization and its impact on feminist movement or its relationship with gender inequality or equality. There are so many issues to discuss. Anyway, anyone with a comment on any of the comments made on this particular issue and on discussion questions? Anyone? Yes.
I think that there's like a bit of problem with saying that prostitution is bad or bad because I think that prostitution has also been used historically by women as a way to access money and a way to live.
Yes.
You can't work in any other industry and they force prostitution because of that. And that's the only way that you're able to live. And I don't think that prostitution is necessarily an issue. It's the idea that
Mm.
So I think that like in Korea it's similar, right? If women are going there because it's a war, and I think that you can say it's like yeah, reputation, etc. But I don't think that we say that like I all prostitutes the same drama. And I also think that like it's a structural issue and it's more about how society is in itself rather than the women that are the problem.
Mm. All right, thank you. I'll summarize the comments after we hear from the student at the back. Yes, go ahead. Yes. Mm. That's right. So, yes.
And also on that, I think like actually the reason why some countries legalize it is like more in order to provide like the rights to the women
Mm.
and like protection, things like that. So for example, often if it's illegal, then there are like other problems connected to it, like slavery, violence. But then if it's legalized, then like that gives more kind of more kind of protection mechanism.
Okay. Thank you. To summarize the comments made so far, so the fact that some women do engage in prostitution is because of the structural problem where women are discriminated from getting jobs that they deserve, and so that's why it's not fair to categorically sort of demonize all the prostitutes in any given society. And I think, at least from the comments I've heard, it's probably better to actually legalize prostitution because it protects these women who engage in sex work. And you know, we often use the term prostitution, but more politically correct term they say is sex worker, okay? And prostitution, sex work, okay? And you know, there are definitely some positive results that come from legalization of sex work, in the sense that women are protected, and that way there's no room for organized crime to you know, exploit women from, and also they get to pay tax, okay? And that's also good for society in a way, right? But anyway, if there are no other comments, I'll move on to the last point, and this one is also in a question mark form, okay? And see if you could agree with me on this. I mean, this is actually not my own original idea. I read this from an article written by a feminist, okay? And she spent the whole article discussing this issue and pointing this out as a reason for gender inequality in Korea, and see if you could agree with her point of view. Now, in battles, primary victims are men, especially for those on the losing side. But women may be victimized more after the battle or war, as you'd agree, right? During the Goryeo dynasty, single commoner girls were drafted by the state and sent to the Mongolian court as yearly tribute. In order to avoid this, many commoner girls married as early as 13 or 14 years of age. Mixed children were derogatorily called horojashik or horejashik. The term is used to refer to, I mean, it's an insulting word. You don't want to hear someone call you by that name, okay? I don't think it's commonly used now, but I think at least, 30 years ago, it was quite commonly used term to refer to someone who has no culture or who has no manners. But just to insult someone, you use that term to refer to a person of mixed heritage, okay? And also Korean women during the Joseon Dynasty, during the second Manchu invasion of Korea in 1636, Qing soldiers from China were eager to capture Joseon women to keep as concubines or sell for money. To avoid the disgrace of getting raped by Qing soldiers, many women chose to commit suicide. In the midst of chaos, noblemen even urged their mothers, wives, and daughters to kill themselves. Women who survived the Qing's wrath were taken to Shenyang, where an even harsher fate awaited them. The general's wives were jealous of the Joseon women and tortured them with boiling water and other types of or forms of punishment. Now, the next slide is even more painful. Many Joseon women were lucky enough to be repatriated to their hometowns after a ransom was paid. But their joy was short-lived because they were unwelcomed and were stigmatized. Many married women from the noble class were not even allowed to reunite with their husbands. Okay? And it continues. During World War II, tens of thousands of Korean women were taken overseas as comfort women. You are all familiar with this, right? Up to 200,000 Korean girls and women were taken to war zones for Japanese soldiers. Okay? Now, when they returned after the liberation in 1945, what happened? They were not welcome, not even by their families. They were stigmatized, and most of them had to live the rest of their lives in shame until death. I mean, we actually built a group home for these women to live together because their own family members would not take care of them. Okay, and the story about these women only broke in the early 1990s, after about half a century has passed. Why? Because Korean government, you know, with all these policymakers being men, they wanted this shameful history to be hidden. All right? So what happened? We call this, in psychology, victim blaming. Okay? Now, who were at fault for not being able to protect these women? It was men, Korean men. But instead of empathizing with their pain and feeling sorry for them, what did Korean men do? They pointed fingers. You're bad because you lost your chastity. You're bad because you're raped by a foreign soldier. All right? And that's, according to this author, who's a woman, Korean feminist scholar, that this is a reason, also a cause of gender inequality in Korea. Okay? So, because, it's not a small number here, okay? We're talking about, I mean, women who are taken overseas as comfort women was a small number. But, you know, we'll go back to Manchu invasion, the Japanese invasion in the 17th century. We're talking about a huge number of Korean women who were violated. And many of them did have children, okay, from all the rape, okay? And all these, you know, children were also ostracized, stigmatized, right, as horojashik, okay? So, well, any thought on this particular argument? Does it make sense? Yes. Mm. Mm. Okay. All right. So to recap what she just talked about, and to add some of my own comments, and don't take this as a sort of an anti-Japanese comment, but I'm just making I hope to be an objective observation. Again, in recapping what she just said, and to add a little bit of my own comments. As you know, with Japan and, between Japan and Korea, we still have this outstanding historical issue, right? One is forced laborers. We're talking about millions of Koreans who are taken overseas as forced laborers, and also who are mobilized as forced laborers within Korea. Talking about millions. They were never compensated. Okay, so that really is so different from what Germany did with the former forced laborers in Europe. And there's this issue of comfort women. And one outstanding issue is this. The Japanese government has been arguing that these women went to, let's say, these battlegrounds voluntarily to work as sex comfort women. Now, just like what she said, if these girls were tricked into going, and they were really, and the testimonies from these women say exactly the same thing. The recruiters, who happen to be typically Korean men, they promised things like this, and they usually targeted girls from poor families. So they think and where hunger was also a major issue, right? They said things like this: you come with me, you go to Japan, you'll eat well, we'll send you to school, you'll earn money to be able to send back home. How could you say no to that when there was no internet, there was no mass media, right? To get information on anything. So when these women were tricked into going, is that taking action voluntarily, like the Japanese government is saying? So I sort of get heated up when I get to talk about this, because I don't know why giving an apology and providing some compensation to these women is such a hard thing, And now we only have, 20, 30 of these victims left. So even if many were alive for the economy the size of Japan, the compensation would have amounted to less than 1% of its GDP, okay? Not even 1/10 of 1%, okay? But anyway, it's an issue that still sort of hinders more better progress of the relationship between the two countries. Okay? Anyway, any other last comment on gender inequality before I move on? Yes. What? Mm. 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 Well, that's something to think about, whether you could add something like a shame culture, Korea, which Korea is. Can that be added to as a factor? Is that? Mm. So I think instead of adding shame culture as a separate entry, but I think, victim blaming and also something about Confucianism also it's part of this. I mean, in a way, Confucianism can be said to be about shame culture, right? Because if you veer away from the accepted norm or standard, the idea is that you sort of violate sort of a time-honored code of conduct or and that kind of thing. All right? Okay, thank you. And well, we're finishing this discussion on gender inequality, but if you have any other comments to make, you're welcome to email me. Okay. Week 7, so I think with maybe a half an hour left for today, not even half an hour, about 20 minutes. I think I don't think we'll have any time left, meaning you know how we were sort of a half week ahead of schedule, but I think we're about on a right pace, okay? All right, Education Frenzy in Korea. Very fancy title, wouldn't you say? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's from a famous Western movie starring Clint Eastwood, spaghetti Western. Anyway, I think it's a perfect title for explaining education in Korea. Okay, there's something good, something bad, and something ugly, okay? So the lecture outline goes like this. As always, introduction. It's also one of the longer ones. And then I'll probably get to finish up to here, okay? And then next week, on Wednesday and on, reasons for education fever in Korea, positive consequences of such education frenzy, negative impacts, and conclusion. Okay? Introduction. Just have some fun looking at these images. Can you read this well? It says here, if you do not study, you will end up like him. Here, if you study well, you will be able to make a better world for him. Wow, you know, seeing the same thing, just totally different reaction from the mother, right? As a way of educating her child. This is in just 3 short, sort of, not short, but 3 different portrayals. You have, this really provides an excellent picture of what education is like. So here, if policymakers are pursuing equality, this is what it looks like. But then each student has different abilities, right? So, and if policymakers are into equity, this is what they would try to do, okay? But the reality is this, right? Now, I don't know if I mentioned this before. One of the, I think, the most important virtues a person could have is modesty, okay? So when I see Koreans who are graduates of, let's say, SNU, who are like, you know, I'm a SNU graduate. It just makes me sick. And because, as you'd agree, about 70 to 75% of the world population have an IQ that falls within the normal range, Okay? Meaning, they all have the same mental capacity to either make it to Harvard University or get stuck with diploma. So what determines someone's educational success? It's house environment. Okay? So if you're born into a family where both of your parents are working all the time and cannot help you with your homework, what are the chances of that person excelling in math, chemistry, right? So this educational deprivation is so closely tied to one's socioeconomic background, not one's mental capacity. Okay? So the reason I'm trying to tell you this is that I think with educational achievement, being modest means that you should also have this sense that you're lucky, that you had parents who cared about your education to provide an environment that made you who you are today. Okay? Again, this sense of thankfulness for this lucky situation you're in. Okay? That's being about modest. Okay? Anyway, this is also a very interesting graph. This is timeline, 6th century, 7th century, 8, 9, 10, so on, right? So in Europe, at least, the education was provided mostly by monasteries until like 12th century. That was the center of knowledge, okay, and education. Okay? But from about 12th century, universities started to, not just universities, but also educational institutes began to emerge. Okay? And this is just for your general knowledge, comparison of education prior to the 19th century and modern period. So this left, the middle column, prior to the 19th century, the right column, modern period. Okay? So target, aristocratic class, masses, elective education, mandatory, whole person education, teaching knowledge and skills which are needed for industrial societies, main courses, humanities and art subjects, helpful to production activities. Of course, these are just generalizations, okay? Pedagogical method, discussion-oriented class, conducted one-to-one or small, large classes, and largely unilateral lectures like this particular class, right? KU is definitely not a Harvard, right? But one thing I like about Harvard is that it has enough money to make sure that no class has a student enrollment exceeding 10 students. Can you believe that? 10. So if I were to teach in the same setting with only 10 students, will this be what I do with 10 students? No. If I had only 10 students, this is what I'll do. I'll assign about 3 chapters a week and have the students write journals. Okay? How long? 2-3 pages, single-spaced per article each week. And with only 10 students, I would have no problem reading the assignments, marking them, making comments, and during class, what do? We discuss about the readings. Okay, not me lecturing, but we discuss what we read over the week, right? But that's Harvard. And this something I just talked about I do at the graduate level. Okay, but with an undergraduate class, it's not something that could be done. All right. Anyway, this is the last sort of a graph I want to show you. So in the post-COVID-19 era, and also I think in the with the oncoming fourth industrial revolution period, education is changing like this. We're used to this, right? 3S, same age, same place, same time. But now, or from now on, the learning takes place with anyone, anytime, anywhere. Okay? So, something to keep in mind, okay, how education is changing. Okay, preliminary observations about Korean education. Some sad stuff that I have to share with you about Korea. Okay, South Korea has achieved unparalleled economic development in the 77 years after World War II. I'm jumping ahead, but did you know? Okay. Going back to the first point, and I probably mentioned this when we first met. Korea is the only country since the end of World War II which was officially recognized as a country having transformed from a developing country to a developed country. Again, only one country in the whole world, in world history, which, again, made a transition from a developing country, like any country in developing Asia or Africa. Korea is the only country. Okay? Now, so, you know, it was a very poor country, poorer than Thailand, the Philippines, Angola, and Peru back in 1960, okay? And poorer than North Korea back in 1960, okay? So all these growth, we attribute the success to emphasis on Korea education. So again, country is not, Korea is not endowed with any natural resources to speak of. I think the only 100% self-sufficiency we have is rice. You know, as, remember I said we're racist, right? So we definitely produce enough rice, but that is the only thing we have 100% sufficiency. Everything else we import, okay? We import even, of course, oil, and then we export refined oil. That's the power of Korea, okay? We import oil, crude oil, we refine it, and resell it. Anyway, the point is, so it's not just me, okay? So when people, you know, come to this thought, so how did Korea do this? This remarkable economic transformation with no natural resources to speak of? What did they rely on? Human resources. And at the basis of human resources, the role of education is always pointed out. Okay? So that's something very positive. But Korea's education-based economic success also came with a cost. I just talk about suicide here, but the stress of trying to always get good grades is stifling. So if for all the non-Korean students, you have to be very thankful that you were not born in Korea, because it's really hell when you are a student from, let's say, grade 3, grade 5 on, especially. But the education hell begins as soon as you're born, in a way, right? Because some sort of energetic parents start sending their kids to like English learning private institute from age like 3. Okay? Because the idea is earlier you start, better you will get ahead, right? Anyway, I'll talk more about this education guilt. Okay? Is there such a thing? Education guilt or grade guilt? If you're a bad student, if you don't get good grades, you lose your self-esteem. You just don't feel good. But you think I was a good student? I went to, because my family immigrated to Canada when I was in grade 8. And I was not a good student in Korea before I immigrated. And in junior high and high school, I was not a good student. But I never felt bad. I knew I was not a good student, but I didn't feel bad. But if I were living in Korea and if I was a bad student, and it would be so terrible. Because it's education, education, education. There's no life other than education for those aged between, let's say, 10 to 19. There's no life to speak of. It's all studying, studying, studying. Can you imagine your grade 10, 11, 12, never going to a movie, never going to a party, never watching a SNL, Saturday Night Live, or, doing nothing for fun? Can you imagine that? I'm slightly exaggerating, okay? But that's a typical life of a person who wants to go to a, not even prestigious, good university, or university in the capital region. Okay? Anyway, so of all the negative aspects, I sort of picked on suicide. Okay? So you don't see it here, right? But there it is. In 2020 alone, nearly 800 youth between the age of 10 to 19 committed suicide. Okay? So for this age group, suicide has been the #1 cause of death for the 10 years straight. Okay? And why? Is it because of drugs or problems with their parents? No. School related. Okay? Stress. A survey shows that nearly 1 in every 3 middle and high school students in Korea thought about suicide in 2020. In a poll of 5,669 middle and high school students, 27% said they had thought about taking their own life in that year. Asked about the reasons for thinking of suicide, #1 reason, academic problems. #2, it's also related to academic performance. It's about future. And how is one's future, what's the key thing about, when one worries about the future, it is also a future related to one's academic performance, because depending on which university you graduate, your life pretty much changes. Okay? So family conflict, conflicts with fellow students, economic difficulty, they're minor reasons. Okay? Here are some examples of suicide notes left by those who actually committed suicide. These are real suicide notes left by those who committed suicide, which were reported in the newspapers. Okay? We're not studying machines, we're just teenagers. A suicide note by a high school student in 1989, happiness should not be based on grade ranking. Third suicide note left by a high school girl in June 1999, in which she said, I finally earned my freedom at this greatest moment. In 2002, a fourth grade, 11-year-old student hung himself, and he left this diary. There are many times I wanted to die. My dad works for 20 hours in 2 days and has 20 hours left off, but I, a child, have to study for 27 hours, 30 minutes, and I have just 20 hours and 30 minutes to myself. He also wrote that I have too many homework from school and private academies. I want to quit school. I want to be free like fish. A junior high student in 2011, I want to leave the society that evaluates people based on grades. Last one. There has also been homicides caused by education frenzy. For example, a Seoul court in March 2012 sentenced a 17-year-old youth to 3 years and 6 months in prison for killing his mother. A crime, he said, he was driven to by the physical and mental abuse he sustained because of her obsession with his school grades. According to media accounts, the youth appearing in court in school uniform testified that his mother had beaten him with a golf club, verbally abused him, and denied him meals for a period of days because she was angry with his test scores. Anyway, these are maybe you could think of extreme examples, but as a parent who's, I have 2 children, they're in university now, but I could totally empathize with whatever I have to say because I went through this particular hell. And it has not changed. And so the extra money that it costs to raise a child in Korea and the record low fertility rate, all of this is closely tied to education hell in Korea. And I think that's a perfect metaphor or perfect wording. Education hell. Okay? And so I'll talk about why, there's this talk of education hell in Korea tomorrow, on Wednesday, and next Monday. All right?